Thank you, Richard. It was just 5 minutes ago that Richard said on Saturday night, in a few moments, I'm going to be saying, it's been a good week. You remember that? We had just come off the end of the previous week, which I was here for a couple of days of that, when our son was here with his family. And then we led into this week. And when he said, it's Saturday, good to see everybody, welcome. And it seemed like he said in a few moments, I'll be saying it's been a good week. And here we are at that point. And that is just hard to believe. But I hope everyone here has had a good week. It's been a very good week for me and my family for the time they were able to be here. I do want to mention that the three ladies from Tennessee do not look like they're back yet, are they? They were going to take in Yellowstone, all of Yellowstone, Jackson, and the Tetons yesterday. And they've never been here before. So I don't remember who it was telling me this, but there are several ladies here that told them, pack some luggage, plan to stay overnight. Maybe they'll be back by supper tonight, I hope. That's a lot of territory to cover: Yellowstone, the Tetons, and Jackson. But when I mentioned the other night that this was a very good camp and good to see the kids functioning so well and respectful and cooperating, actually I said to everybody, she came up and said, and it's especially so because of the kids. She's the one that made the point about how obedient, respectful, hardworking they are. None of them complaining about KP duty or any of the other chores we have here, at least not that I'm hearing. Maybe when they get back to the cabin, they do to the parents. But when they're out here, they're just working well, and it is just really marvelous. You parents have done a marvelous job. You young people are fine young people. Just stay on this track. And hopefully that's what camp helps support. I have been going to youth rallies and Bible camps since like 1979 or 80. That's when I started working as a youth minister. And I worked as a youth minister for 2 years. I went into preaching, and I've continued to do that. Sometimes 3 and 4 youth rallies a year. The last 4 or 5 years, we've done 3 Bible camps a summer. Use vacation time for that, do 3 Bible camps a summer. And you wonder, what's the effect? You come and you have a great week, then you go back home to where you have the jobs where maybe a boss doesn't appreciate you, or maybe you're the boss. And you have employees who don't appreciate you, and you try extra hard to be a good boss. And you have things that rub you raw and things that tempt you and make you angry. What good does a week of camp do? And I don't think it's just 1 week of camp. I think it's just like it's not one youth rally. It's an accumulation of things over time. It's an accumulation of things over many years. That the cumulative effect. If you go to 2 Bible camps a week for, 25 years? How many years have you spent in a Bible camp? That's a solid year you've spent in Bible camp. Even though it's been spread out, that has an effect. Same with youth rallies. The people you meet, the way they can touch you, the coachable moment. When I talked about the coach, the football coach earlier in the week, and how he uses the moments to impress on his athletes. You can do this, or forget the last play, concentrate on the next one. Those moments occur in the context of community with other people. Chris Crooks is preaching now at Belgrade. Been there several years, right? I was at a Bible camp with Chris Crooks in 1992 at Black Hills Bible Camp. And at the time it was in eastern Wyoming. Now it's in South Dakota. I didn't realize at the time that the Black Hills actually extend into Wyoming, don't they? Yeah. So when I went to Black Hills Bible Camp, I told the family, I says, we're going to South Dakota. And we went to Wyoming, where we lived. But then we got to go into the heads. It was right there. But it's a really neat camp, and Chris was there. And years later, when I talked to Chris on the phone, he said he remembered something I said at that camp. And I said, what? I said, I don't really remember us even having that much of a conversation. And I still don't remember what it was that he remembered. If you go to Belgrade, ask him maybe. But I know I remember some things people said years ago that they might not even remember talking to me. But I remember them talking about how to handle a situation, or how to show appreciation to your wife, or how to handle a difficult situation with one of your kids. And they might have just been saying it just, out of hand. This is what we tried and it worked for us. But if you're desperate at that moment for information, that information can change your life. It takes them 30 seconds, but it can impact the next 30 years for you. That is the benefit of Bible camp. That is the benefit of a youth rally. That's the benefit of a Bible lectureship. Those moments, maybe in a class, maybe outside the class, maybe drinking coffee between classes. Something that registers and makes a difference. And I hope from this week something will register and make a difference for the next 5 years. And for those that are young enough, for the next 50 years. It'll change us. And if it does, it can also change eternity for us. Amen? Leadership. We talked about how leadership takes place in the context of community. That as leaders, we are concerned with the marginal, the people on the margins of our community, because if they're within realm or within reach of our influence, then it may well be that God has brought them to the margins to come under our care. And He may hold us responsible, as we'll see this morning. So we want to reach out to the marginalized. We want to listen. Because listening not only informs us as to where these people are, but it can also inform us about ourselves. As we listen, we can learn about ourselves. And it can let us know how to better minister to the people within our family, within our church, within our Bible class. And today we're going to talk about shepherding. And this is maybe my favorite lesson out of these 5 lessons that we've done on leadership. Shepherding. Deuteronomy 17, 16 through 20. Deuteronomy 17, 16 through 20. This is a summary. The king, who was the shepherd of Israel, was not to accumulate horses, because horses represented what? Military power. If you will, they were the weapons of mass destruction at that time. They were not to accumulate gold or silver, because that would be materialism. They were not to accumulate wives, because besides the fact that that was not very honoring of the wives, it could lead his heart astray, which we saw happen to what king? Solomon. The king was supposed to trust God. He was supposed to make a copy of the scriptures and read them daily. Can you imagine that God said the president or the king of a nation is to handwrite a copy of the scriptures, which at that point probably was not all the prophets. Maybe later in history it was, but at least the books of the law, Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy, make a hand copy of the law and read it daily, obey the law, and not consider himself better than his subjects. In other words, just because you're king does not mean you are above your people. I don't know if this story is true. It's one of the stories, though, that from American history that just really makes me appreciate some of our founding fathers even more. I would like to find out if this one is true. I read it in a reputable source, but it didn't have a reference to it, which I always like, because when you write, you've got to be able to say, well, yes, I found this in such and such a source, it's reputable. Otherwise, you come into question. But supposedly, Thomas Jefferson was traveling, and back in the early days of our country, the political leaders, even the presidents, didn't have a huge political entourage that went with them, including bodyguards. You know, where one trip across the country could cost $2 or $3 million because of all these people. And I realize today we have to have them. But he would just travel with a couple of friends. And when he was president, he goes to this motel. He's got to spend a night somewhere, go to an inn, they called it then. And there was a farmer up front, needed an inn for himself and his family. And the proprietor of the motel said, "We're sorry, we don't have any more rooms." So when the farmer turned to leave, the owner of the motel or the inn saw President Jefferson and said, "Mr. Jefferson, thank you for coming to stay with us. We have a room for you." And Thomas Jefferson, the President of the United States, said, "If you don't have room for a farmer, you don't have room for me." And he turned and he walked out. Maybe Thomas Jefferson read Deuteronomy. The president of a country is not above his people. He would not be the president. He would not have his salary. He would not have all the other stuff he gets under the table if it was not for the people who put him there and who pay the taxes. And God told the king, don't you ever forget that. Because even though you have political power and position, you also have important spiritual responsibilities. So we will sometimes say that the deacons in our church have leadership, or they have responsibility over the material things, right? We have the elders who are over the people, and the deacons who are over the buildings and the grounds, the plant, the physical things. But according to previous history, God said, even if you don't have what we would consider direct spiritual position or leadership, if you are in a position over God's people in any way, that involves spiritual implications. So even deacons in Acts chapter 6, not called deacons there, but called leaders, or called people that were going to be serving, they had to be men of spiritual nature. And I think the same is true today. Ezekiel 34, let's turn to that one. Because Ezekiel 34 has some very, very important insights into what it means to be a spiritual leader, a shepherd. Can't get my pages to turn. Ezekiel 34 is about the shepherds of Israel, and these could be, in fact, at the top of your chapter heading, it probably says shepherds and sheep, something like that. And it doesn't identify who all the shepherds were. It could very well be the king, and sometimes it looks like it definitely is. But it could also be prophets, could be priests. I think anybody who is positioned as a leader in Israel, this chapter is written for them. And by inheritance, since as Christians we inherit the Old Testament scriptures, I think better called the Jewish scriptures, because there's much of them, at least in principle, that are very, very, very much operative in our lives today, such as this chapter. But by inheritance, those of us who are leaders among God's people today, this chapter also has important implications for. The word of the Lord came to me, Son of man, prophesy against the shepherds of Israel. Prophesy and say to them, this is what the sovereign Lord says. Woe. Now, woe is a bad word in this context. If you make a great play out here in volleyball or basketball, or when Brett or Matthew are throwing the discs out here, they make a great throw, you might go, whoa. Right? But when God looks at you and says, whoa, that's not the same kind of whoa. Okay, that is a bad whoa. That is, you're in trouble. It's more like what your parents say to you and they go, whoa. Some of you have heard that. God says, you go tell the shepherds of Israel, bad news, woe. Woe to the shepherds of Israel who only take care of themselves. Should not shepherds take care of the flock? You eat the curds, clothe yourselves with the wool, and slaughter the choice animals, but you do not take care of the flock. You have not, look at this, you have not strengthened the weak, healed the sick, or bound the injured. You have not brought back the strays or searched for the lost. You have ruled them harshly and brutally. So they were scattered because there was no shepherd. And when they were scattered, they became food for all the wild animals. Much of what is described here is what takes place in, say, a visitation program, or when you sit down with someone every so often and you have a cup of coffee for an hour or two and you talk about what's going on in your life. Woman to woman, man to man. How come your wife is thinking of leaving? How come your husband is staying longer at work? Is it something he's doing at work, or is it the greeting he gets when he gets home and he doesn't feel welcomed? What is the problem in your relationship with your children? What is the problem in your relationship with your parents? Is it your fault? Are you not obeying their voice? Back and forth, these kind of discussions, and we might help somebody realize the husband might be complaining about the way his wife is receiving him, and through conversation over a cup of coffee a couple times a week or several times a month, he finds out, well, yeah, I am preoccupied when I get home. I am a bit grumpy sometimes. I do expect this or that. And maybe there's a reason why she's getting a little short with me. You see, you have a cup of coffee with a brother over time, and you may well save his marriage. You have a cup of coffee with a sister in Christ over time, and you may well save her relationship with her oldest child. You know, that's what comes from spending that kind of time together, formally, informally, talking about family and friends. And that is exactly what Ezekiel 34 is talking about. Exactly. How come someone leaves the church, we go ask them what happened, and then we find out they've been unhappy for the last 5 years at church? Why didn't we know that for the last 5 years? Because we haven't had a cup of coffee with them to find out what's going on in their world. That's what Ezekiel 34 is about. John chapter 10, 1 through 18, you're very familiar with that one. That's what Jesus says, the shepherd knows the sheep know the shepherd. He calls them by name. And that was always such an amazing passage to me until we got sheep on our farm. You know, and you really can get to know some of the sheep and get to distinguish them. I bet if you had a flock of 100, it'd be a whole lot harder. We had about 7 or 8. But you can tell the different sheep, the lambs that are born, the way they jump. You spend time walking around the pasture with them, and they follow you and they nibble on your pants looking, because they know you pull grain out of there sometimes or whatever and throw it to them. So they're looking for it. You get to know them. They get to know you. They trust you. You can walk right in among them. And that's from spending time in the pasture. And what John 10 says is spiritual leaders should spend time in the pasture. You might be a Sunday school teacher and think, I'm not an elder. But you are a shepherd. You have the responsibility of that class. That is your spiritual group that you're leading. Nina, who's sitting over here, taught middle school girls for years, and one of the features that they remember years later is how she had them in her house for waffles numerous times a year. And when someone would come back, they'd be back over for waffles. That is shepherding outside that formal context where we sometimes think my responsibility ends there. No, there is a sense when we leave there is where our responsibility begins in a whole different way. And that is now trying to interact with them in the worlds where they live. Proverbs 27. We looked at this one the other day, but let's look at it again. Proverbs 27. There's a crucial verse, a key verse, to help us understand and unlock some of the important ingredients that go into being a spiritual leader. Proverbs 27:23. Be sure you know the condition of your flocks. Give careful attention to your herds, for riches do not endure forever, and a crown is not secure for all generation. Know the condition of your flocks is literally know well the faces of the animals. The literal Hebrew is know well their faces. Know the faces of your bulls, your cows, your sheep, your hogs, your ducks, whatever it is. And that means you spend enough time with your animals, you know your animals well. If you can catch a cow in the early stages of getting sick, maybe you can save its life, and that may save you how much money? Okay? So this is a metaphor, though. This is really not about animals. This is really about churches. A crown is not secure for all generations, verse 24, means an inattentive king could lose his throne. Leaders should show the same attention to their people as a farmer shows to his cows. How can we be spiritual leaders, functioning as Jesus among the people, if we don't know our people even as well as a farmer knows his billy goat? We've got to be among the people. And I think one of the challenging things for this day and age is so much stuff can be done digitally, so much can be done online, so much can be done away from people. You can move to places like Wyoming and Montana and live way off somewhere because you've got a job that you do online. And you can live wherever you want to, literally, so long as you get your work done online. There are universities now where virtually all the work, at least most of the work, is done online. If you're a teacher for them, you can live anywhere. I teach an online class for Harding. Harding's in Searcy. I am in Kansas. I never go to campus. I teach it on the computer. I mean, it's just crazy. Does that mean that I have no responsibility toward those students? It's hard to function that way as a spiritual shepherd over them. What I try to do to make it a little more personal is I give my phone number, and I try to have at least one phone conference with every student individually over the course of the summer. Even that's not face-to-face like we are right here, but at least it's a little more personal than just the computer screen. But I try to set up, I'll give them my phone call. Not all of them choose to do it. There's about a fourth that choose. This class was a bigger class. There's about half that chose not to do it, not to have the phone call. But at least half always choose, yeah, I want to call, and we'll talk for about an hour about their wife or their husband, as men and women take the class, their spouse, their children, where they went to college, where they grew up, what they want to do when they graduate. Just little personal things to try to make this a little more shepherding type, farming. And I think that's what God wants in our local churches. Have you ever walked into a church that even was your home church, and sometimes you walk in there and you feel like, do I belong in here anymore? Is this really my spiritual family anymore? Well, you know there's a certain disconnect taking place. And there's really only one way I know of, one effective way to overcome that disconnect, and that's to reconnect. And you do that over coffee. And I'm saying over coffee, I got that phrase from one of my teachers who would talk about deep theological issues, and he'd say, and you know how we resolve some of these in our local churches? He'd say, over a cup of coffee. You sit down with someone and you have a personal Bible study, you have a personal conversation, you get to know them, they get to know you, and even if you disagree on some important issues, you can at least respect each other because you've gotten to know each other and know that you've got a fellow or mutually sincere hearts. And he said, that'll save a lot of churches. And that'll help a lot of us feel like we continue to belong. Any questions or comments on this? To this point. Shepherding the flock, overseeing the flock, being among the people. Whether you're an elder, a deacon, Sunday school teacher, even parents with their kids. Any of you know parents that never spend time with their kids, never see them even? What effect does that have on them? You don't have to say it, I can see it in your eyes. It's got a hard effect on them. Well, here are six shepherding functions. If you're going to be a shepherd, here are 6 things. Well, hold on. I skipped letter E. Here's implications. Implications before the functions. Implications of being a spiritual leader based on these verses of Scripture we just read. John chapter 10, Proverbs 27, Ezekiel 34, Deuteronomy 27. From those 4 readings, here are 6 implications. Number 1, shepherds give attention and care to the conditions of their flock. Some of this will be a repeat. Shepherds give attention and give care to the condition of their flock, whether it's your family, a Bible class, a small group, or a church. And we've had a couple of stories this week of the importance, if all you do is pick one person at your church. The very fact that you're here means that you have some level of spiritual understanding that lets you know it's important to be among other Christians in other settings. And you've taken a week out of your year, a week out of your summer, to come here, many of you to people that you've never met before, but trusting God and having confidence that God is going to bring something good out of this week. Even though, how many of you came and didn't know hardly anybody? Maybe you knew 2 or 3 and that was all. Okay, there's several of you. You still came because you know God enough to trust Him and to have confidence that He will bring something good out of this. Do you know there's a lot of people in your church that don't have that same level of trust or confidence? So you've got some spiritual maturity that somebody in your church does not, and you can just go back and maybe you've seen this person for the longest time, and you just say, well, how has your summer been? What'd you do special? Well, that's neat. Well, we just went to a camp in Montana. I need to tell you about that sometime. And so, oh, by the way, why don't we make a date for coffee and I'll tell you about it this week. What are you doing Thursday morning? You know, and make a date, go out someplace for coffee, go to a neutral place. and buy their cup and have a conversation. And just the interest you show in them could be enough to give them fresh hope in life. You may think you are disconnected and don't know where you fit in this body, but if you feel that way, don't you know there's about 30 or 40% of the people that also feel that way? We feel alone sometimes, and we're not unique in feeling alone. I am constantly amazed by confident, well-placed people in our community who tell me that they don't feel like they belong in their business, in their work, in their church. I don't just mean our church, whatever church they're a member of. They don't feel like they belong, and they don't know where their place is. And I sit back and I think, I can't believe that it seems like everybody I'm talking to at some time or another feels that way. And they need somebody to help come along and relieve that. Otherwise, they may opt out. They may choose to leave. And your invitation to someone to go to coffee may break that negative cycle, that cycle of negative thought that could lead them away from your fellowship. So go back, pick one person, be a shepherd to them. Number 2, shepherding requires time, effort, personal sacrifice on the part of the shepherds. And the shepherds here I'm using as a neutral term because this could include men or women. And I don't mean shepherd in the sense of a woman elder from 1 Timothy 3, but I mean a woman who shepherds other people is a shepherd. If she is leading other women and guiding other women into deeper spiritual life, into connectedness and to friendship, she is shepherding them in a spiritual sense. I'm not saying she's an elder over the church, but I am saying she is functioning like Jesus functioned. Jesus laid down his life for the sheep. Well, how much do we give ourselves for the sheep? We have to make up our own minds on how far we're willing to go. But just so you know how far you can go, Jesus died. That's how far he went for the sheep. Number 3, failure to shepherd could result in members of the flock wandering off. Failure to shepherd could result in members of the flock wandering off. If we want to save our flock, we've got to reach out to our flock. Number 4, failure to shepherd could result in leadership of shepherds not being recognized by the sheep. Failure to shepherd could result in the leadership of the shepherds not being recognized by the sheep. You might be one of the shepherds at your church, and one Sunday you stand up and you say, we're going to start doing this. Or you see a member doing something and say, we don't approve of you doing that. And they look at you and say, and who are you? You have lost that encounter. You've lost that encounter. Where does the authority of elders come from? It comes largely from the respect the members have for them. The leadership of shepherds are like the American dollar bill. How many of you have a dollar bill in your files at home or in a drawer that says US $1 payable to bearer on demand, $1 in silver? How many of you have one of those? That's called a silver certificate. And that meant at one time when that $1 bill was produced, the U.S. Treasury had $1 worth of silver to back that. If they produced a $10 bill, it would say payable to the bearer on demand, $10 in silver. They had $10 worth of silver on demand for the bearer of that bond, that note, that $10 bill. So when you would go trade it into a bank, you could get $10 in silver. Now what does it say? Pardon? Yeah. And they've had to start saying, in God we trust, because we don't have the backing anymore. Okay? So the government's hoping we continue trusting that there is something here. This note is legal tender for all debts, public and private. This is worth $1 because the government says it is. But you go try trading this in for $1 worth of silver. Most of the people at the checkout counter at the bank will not even know what you're talking about. Especially the younger ones. They will have no idea. We're so far removed from any solid backing here. All this has is our trust. And once we lose enough confidence in the government, and we lose confidence in this, what is this worth? What were the Confederate notes worth toward the end of the Civil War? Nothing. That's what this will be worth one day. if we lose confidence, because there's no solid backing. Okay, the solid backing of a shepherd, he has backing. She has backing. You know what it is? It's a life well lived. That's why 1 Timothy 3 talks about this man, and his wife is included in this every bit as much as he is, because they work together to raise these children, to have a good name in the community. I know as a preacher, I could not do, and there's several from Ulysses will vouch for this, and you don't have to do it out loud because you know you can. I would not have half of what I have going for me in ministry if it wasn't for the partner that I have. Helping with the youth and traveling and doing this and packing for camp and make sure you have this, make sure you have this, and do you have that? Even those little things, all the way to preparing things in the community and meals for people. My role as a minister is enhanced 50% or more by the partner that I have. But all that goes to help us and you in your community have solid backing. But in order for the people to know we have that kind of life, they have to know us. Otherwise, the only thing we have going for us is that we can convince them, you need to trust your leaders. You need to believe your leaders. And then one day, that's put to the test, and this person doesn't even know we're an elder, or doesn't know what an elder is, or doesn't have any respect for the eldership, or doesn't have any respect in particular for us because they don't know who we are. And what happens is our leadership becomes a $1 Federal Reserve note that just floats away because there's no backing to it. So shepherds who fail to shepherd could result in their leadership not being recognized. Number 5, shepherds are held accountable to God. And number 6, shepherding is an important function. Shepherding is an important function. Shepherding, one person or 100 people, no matter what size, no matter what setting, if it's your Sunday school class, if it's the church as a whole, if it's one person over a cup of coffee, shepherding is important. It makes a difference in lives. We're better off being an effective shepherd to one person than an ineffective shepherd to 100. And there are men and women sometimes who are disappointed because they did not get to be picked to be an elder for a church for whatever reason. The last time they picked, they were overlooked. They can get very angry. They can get very upset. They can criticize. They can gossip. They can group up and cause trouble for the existing leaders that they didn't get to be because they were not chosen. And when they do that, when elders or potential or would-be elders respond that way, when they don't get put in and then they get angry and they tear at the ones that are in there, all they're doing is proving the church made the right pick. Right? If your name is put up for an elder and there's somebody that questions you and you've got to pull your name out, or the church votes, however your congregation does it, and they take they'll consider those that get 50% of the vote or more, and then these are considered. If you're in the below 50% and you get super angry and vengeful and you try to tear at those new people or the existing elders and show them how dumb they were, all you're doing is proving that the church knew, those members knew what they were doing when they didn't put you in there, because they see your immaturity more clearly than you do. So if the church says, we don't think he's ready to be an elder, or we don't think his wife is as mature yet to be an elder's wife, you can get very angry at that, or you can ask very sincerely, really, what do we need to do? That'll impress your people a whole lot more than getting angry and crying and getting upset. What do we need to do? And they'll give you stuff you need to work on. And the next time an elder is picked, you can be one. I was doing some intervention for a church that was having a fight among the elders. And one man was literally voted out of an eldership. And because the next time they picked, what happened, there was enough conflict, one man was voted out. And he came to me and asked what to do. And I said, go back home, find a young man from a broken home in the community and take him to the local baseball games, take him out for lunch, and then get to know him well enough that once he enjoys those activities with you, start bringing him to Bible class. He said, what's that got to do with anything? What that has to do with everything is it just demonstrates the church made the right choice. If you can't see the purpose in taking a boy from a broken home to do boy stuff with him and pal around with him and be the person he can go to for questions and then wind up taking him to church, you ask, what's the purpose of that? That is shepherding. And the church knew what they were doing when they told you they don't want you to be a shepherd anymore. And he didn't see the point. Shepherding is important, and we're better off shepherding one person effectively than we are 100 people ineffectively. That brings me to the end of this section. So I think even though we're like 2 minutes early, I'm going to go ahead and quit. This is the first time this week I think I'm doing that, so I need to do it just to show you that we can quit early. Does anybody have a question or a comment? How about a shepherd you remember that impacted you in a positive way, and what was it they did? Richard.
Brenda Knight, one of the 3 ladies that's visiting here. I moved to Greeley, Colorado alone in 1983. Brenda's husband, Jim, was an elder at the church there in Greeley. They saw that I was alone, young, immature, and they really took me in. He became a mentor. They had 4 children at the time. One that had been moved out of the house, but the other 3 were there. And even with their responsibilities as a family and having 3 children still in school, he and Brenda, but mostly Jim, took time to spend with me and to mentor me. And not only be that father figure, since my family was back in Illinois, but we shared time, like you said, hunting, fishing, camping, and things like that. Something that I'll never forget. And unfortunately, he's gone now, but that to me was a real example of not only an elder, but a mentor and a Christian.
That's powerful. Somebody else? Yes.
When I was a college student at Montana State University in Baldwin, Keith Noyce, who's here this weekend, was an elder there, and he and the other elders had the foresight to form a campus ministry and to hire a campus minister. And that campus ministry has had impact on Montana and nationwide, maybe even worldwide, from the people that became Christians in Montana.
That is powerful. Keith, you're here. I saw you. Where are you? I've got a number of friends from that campus ministry, Keith. Thank you. Just to show you how simple it is, Andy Alsop was an elder at the church in Mariana. He was not a public guy. He was not the kind of elder that likes getting up in front of a class to teach a class. He had done it several times while I was there. He was nervous. He did not like it. He was a salesman, and a very good salesman. One-on-one, he was extremely influential. In front of a group, he was not. But he called me up and he'd say, Warren, let's go drink some coffee. That was he said slurp. Let's go slurp some coffee. And we would talk about, he had 5 kids. He would talk about things they did raising their kids, and we were just starting our family. He would talk about why he changed businesses. And I'm just sitting there just soaking all this in, because you don't get this in college. You don't get this kind of personal insight into someone. Then we moved to Cody, Wyoming, and Marion Phillips was there. And Marion had been an elder in Arkansas. When his kids were grown, he was ready to retire. He decided to move to Wyoming. He wanted to help the church of Wyoming and elk hunt. He chose Cody. We spent hours. In fact, this is one of the things I love about this country is there was 2 older men there that would take me hunting, all kinds of hunting. There are actually 3 older men, but generally we would be paired in 2 of them and me. One day we were rabbit hunting, and it was Marion, Albert, Tate, and me. And Albert says, Warren, he says, you don't need to spend all day in that office. Get your 22 and go out and shoot some rabbits. You don't need to be in the office all day. I love you, Albert, you know. But Mary and I would drive around and we'd talk about this situation or that. We'd see something and that would get his mind going, and he would talk about a similar situation in life. Here is a man that at the time was close to 70. I'm 30. And he says, you know what the greatest accomplishment in my life is? I said, no, what's that? He said that God has seen me through to be true to my wife. He says, because when I was a young man, there were 2 periods in our married life where she was extremely ill for a lengthy period of time, and she couldn't be a wife for months. And I was in construction working in other houses, and I had opportunity. But the Lord showed me at the time to not do it, and I never did. And to this day, that's one of the things I'm most proud of. And I thought, I'm 30 years old. He's almost 70. I don't know if most 30-year-olds know that 70-year-olds wrestled with those same issues when they were younger 40 years earlier. And Marion, in a very appropriate, polite way, let me know, yes, I did. I know what it's like to be your age. And I got through. And he didn't say, and you'll get through. All he talked about was his life experience. But I bought into that story, and I got into his story, and I listened. And then when he talked about having to work and come home and then go to work again because they needed more money, or having to do this, or not getting to buy a rifle when he wanted it, or having to fix a car and drive it years beyond what he should have because he couldn't afford another one. And how we had to do this and make do with that. And I thought, boy, that's right where I'm living now. And those hunting trips with Marion were about a whole lot more than whether or not we got an elk. It was about my family. And it was about how we were going to keep it together. And it was about our church and how it was going to grow. And some of those things happened because of the influence of that person. So when you sit down with someone and you say, well, let's have a cup of coffee, or let's go shoot an antelope, and you spend 3 hours driving in the automobile, boy, do you have an opportunity to do some shepherding. And the neat thing is, you can do it in such a way the other person doesn't even know they're being shepherded. He's about to ring the bell. Let's get the jump on the water and the coffee before the kids get here.